I'm Chris from airwindows, and this is PurestGain. You might ask, what is PurestGain? Well, it's kind of like this is a gain. This is a gain too. And this is a gain. Impressive, huh? Well, the point of PurestGain is just it's been a freebie since I came out with it. And I was asked to do it. The idea is it's possible to do calculations in the DAW where you're taking in a 32-bit floating point number, such as in Logic and a lot of different DAWs. Most of them, the VSTs allow for 64-bit processing. And by that, I don't mean the memory space. 64-bit in terms of DAWs usually means they can address more than 2 gigs of memory. But what I'm talking about is these samples themselves are stored in float or double format. They're stored in 32-bit format or they're stored in 64-bit format. Generally, you're going to find stuff is calculated as 32-bit samples. It'll come in as 16 or 24 bits. You'll export it as 16 or 24 bits, but inside the computer, it's a 32-bit word that's describing how loud the sample is. What a gain plugin will do is change that by adding 1 multiply to everything. Now, that's not to say that this isn't doing other things as well. Like we got a calculation here. Oh wait, the sucker's off. What am I thinking? We can maybe make that be like minus 2.1 and make this also be minus 2.1. We got our balance there, which is affecting that. And we can do things like swapping left and right. For making everything mono. The point being, the more of these processes you do, the more math you do to the sound, the more it's going to be altered and then sort of forced back into that 32-bit floating point format. And if the changes are enough to cause the number to be different, it's being continually returned to a 32-bit is expressed as a 24-bit word and a 16-bit mantissa. What a mantissa means is it's scaling that 24-bit word up and down. So if you have an incredibly faint sound, you're getting a full 24-bit sample, but then their little thing is there saying, no, this is much quieter than this. So effectively, the inside of a DAW is always using a bunch of 24-bit samples over and over again, but scaling them at all different levels. It's scaling them sample by sample because that's how the 32-bit floating point thing works. If this is becoming heavy going, I can only ask your indulgence. I'm trying to explain why I would even make a gain plugin when a gain is a single multiply. Here is the difference between Logic's gain and PurestGain. This is Logic's gain. And this is PurestGain. back to logic. Now, I'm going to be pretty surprised if people can really hear a difference here, but I may be able to demonstrate what I'm on about by stacking up more of these guys. This is not letting me. Okay, fine. So 2.3. Rock on with your bad self. And then we'll make another one. And then we'll make another one. This is getting into sort of the old notorious Pro Tools trap where if you nudged a fader, all of a sudden your tone went away. I think I can use these to now that should do nothing. It's no, I want a minus here. So this should do nothing. However, we may find a difference. Here's PurestGain. And here is logic gains kind of multiplied up. It's only 3 of them. I think we're just starting to hear a sort of flattening going on. Just for laughs, let's Option Command drag some of these guys and multiply it even more. Now remember, this is nothing but a gain and an itty-bitty balance control change. This shouldn't be able to hurt the sound at all, right? That shouldn't happen. Heaven forbid. What would it be like that if you could be in a DAW and just stacking up a bunch of gain controls, you listen to that reverb. What the hell just happened there? Now let's go back and here's what it's supposed to sound like. And back to the logic with all of the gains. Now let's hear if we can get that a little bit bigger. I'm not hearing a big difference there, but I'm definitely getting a sense that if we use enough of these, it's a problem. Whereas I'll start taking these away now. PurestGain does something different, and it sort of noise shapes to the floating point bus in such a way that, here, let's make this go back up. We'll get into the slow fade. I'll demonstrate that in a moment. And then let's use these guys to go back and forth again and again, just to sort of illustrate what's going on here. Plus, minus, plus, minus. And here's a little stack of PurestGain just that same way. Remember, this is nothing but tiny gain changes that shouldn't be anything obvious, certainly not over YouTube. Only reason I'm doing this is that I was starting to explain what the idea of PurestGain is, and just sort of on the fly, I thought, why don't I just stack a bunch of them up and see whether we can hear differences? And we got it's letting the far field of the reverb bloom a little better, and I felt that with the regular gain in Logic, which is a perfectly normal gain control, the point I'm making is that PurestGain is a very minimal multiply here. It does as little as possible. In fact, the slow fade only goes to control the single multiply that the gain does. This is not two stages. This is one same stage here. This brings the sound in, and then you've got a multiply here, and then you've got possibly a different multiply there, and these things may or may not do anything. And we may be passing it to this part of the plugin, whether or not it's enabled, so it's copying the value over to here and to there and to elsewhere, and then it's sending it out to the output again, and just putting it straight to that 32-bit floating point value, which is, of course, a 24-bit fixed point with a scaling factor added to it. And if you do that enough times, you start to hear a sound in even a plugin as simple as this. Even this has a tone. The point of PurestGain is to have a better tone. Of course, there is another point to it as well, which I will demonstrate as soon as I make all these go away, like that. Boop. There is another thing that PurestGain does too, and that is this. Have you ever heard of zipper noise? Zipper noise is what happens if you're automating gains or whatever. And say you're automating this and then you've automated it to suddenly be that. Actually, I can do it better on this. You can automate it to suddenly be that, and then that. But you can have instantaneous changes. But if you have instantaneous changes on a DAW and you are automating it, then it will not be applying the control on every sample, because in a digital audio workstation, we don't work on samples all by themselves. This is why you can't actually have real crosstalk and things on DAWs, because when we're calculating one sample on PurestGain, the other tracks around it, if there were other tracks around it, aren't there at that moment. We're doing 256 or 1024 or whatever of these at a time. Maybe we're doing 16 at a time. This is called latency. That's what the latency setting means. It's giving you the chunk, the amount of samples that the program will do at any one go. And if it can get ready to do a whole bunch of samples in a row and then it does 1,000 of them, it can fit a lot more tracks in than if it had to do all the calculations for the one sample and then drop it all and go and do all the calculations for another sample on another track and so on and so forth. such as you would need to do if you were doing true crosstalk or inter-sample, relativeness. The way this interacts with level setting, like the fader, is if I automate a fader move, the fader move is going to be getting a degree of zipper noise based on how smoothly it can move between settings, whether I'm expecting it to go instantly to another setting. Because if it can go instantly to another setting, that means that it will stay in the one place for 256 samples or however many your latency is, then drip down to the next one, down to the next one, and so on. Now, if we smooth it, which is what slow fade is about, that is going to allow the volume level to change more fluidly, but it's going to not react instantaneously. So that's what the slow fade setting on PurestGain is about. Listen to what it does when I just randomly flip it to different things here. That's extremely fluid. That is, in fact, so fluid that you couldn't really use it in a DAW for a general purpose fader. Faders have to be able to be there when you've told it, like, be at full gain at the sample, please. Don't be fooling around with not being ready to go. The slow fade on PurestGain is specifically designed to be used for, say, if you've got a control surface of some kind. Like I'm looking at one in there. It's a sort of doctored Korg microcontrol. In any case, if you have a control surface and you can assign the faders on that surface to DAW controls, you could just assign it to, say, the channel fader, but that's not going to necessarily protect you from having zipper noise, and you can hear zipper noise most easily here. I can demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about. As soon as I turn the volume down. Test oscillator. Excuse me. Here's a little note. You can hear zipper noise on a sine wave very easily. 40 hertz, real low. Now hear what happens when I change this fader. Little scrunchies. That's what you would get if you were using it on a control surface and telling the fader to take it. It's trying to resist the scrunchies a little bit, but not very successfully. Now, the gain setting on PurestGain is designed to be able to react quickly. It's a trim setting. So with this, oops, sorry about that, a little distortion there. As such, even that is a little cleaner than the fader. I've got it set up in such a way where it can override its setting if you zip it to something. So it instantaneously cuts off. You can hear a bit of a click. But then the moves don't really have crunchies. Whereas I was holding down Option to get a more fine-grained control, and there was no real point to do that. I could just type in 0, honestly. Let's do that. Double click, 0, tab, we're good. The thing about slow fade is we can take something even as dramatic as this 40 hertz tone, where you'll clearly hear crunchies if they're present, and I'll just click around and you'll see that it's going to boop to whatever level it is, but in such a smooth way that there's no trace of any of the zipper noise. Now, bear in mind that that's not a super fast reaction, but if you had your finger on a fader, you would really only be able to move it about as fast as it's going. And if you were doing that, it would keep up. It would be able to keep up with your finger quite effectively. When you're clicking around on the control and just bouncing it to different things, it's exaggerating the result that you get, but it's demonstrating the point of this control. Slow fade, if you're using a control surface and you want to have a bunch of stuff on faders and be able to move them, like dynamically mix everything in such a way that you're really doing an active mix. You're like Lee Scratch Perry and you're like, you might want to have a bunch of PurestGain rather than try to do it using the faders, because you're going to get probably a certain amount of zipper noise using faders. Faders have to be able to go bip instantly to a setting and be there. PurestGain has the smoothing factor, so all of your fader moves will be sort of maximally fluid. There's going to be no sense of zipper noise, even if you're just using sine waves or something like that. It's going to perfectly smooth out those fader motions so that there aren't any artifacts whatsoever. And it's very important in digital audio to be able to keep it clear of funny, especially high frequency artifacts like zipper noise is, because you'll hear them depending upon what you've got playing. If you've got a bunch of mid-range and bass, and it's all very smooth and lush, and you're not filling stuff up with a lot of obnoxious high frequencies, and you got a little zipper noise or something in there, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb because you don't have anything else up around 16 kilohertz. And the zipper noise pokes right out because all of a sudden there's this bright little noise, this bright little click that's the change of a low frequency sound suddenly jumping up in level. PurestGain is maybe not the most necessary plugin anybody might have, although if you were interested in doing fader moves, maybe I've just made my case for it right there. However, it's the exploration of something that I've been trying to do, which is dig into this, audio processing and figure out what I can get out of making the plugins be kind of maximally pure and clean and without funny little digital artifacts. It's amazing how the little digital artifacts can get in the way. Whether that is zipper noise with the slow fade, or the way I was stacking up the tiny gain changes. And although honest, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't hear a thing, if you didn't hear the slightest difference. But I spent a bit of time fooling around with it to see whether I could demonstrate the idea that your regular utility gain control, while it has its uses and is good, has just the tiniest trace of that quantized Pro Tool-y sound, whereas PurestGain, used for the same tiny gain trims, it noise shapes the alterations you've got into the floating point bus. And what that means is as you keep adding them up, the very bottom of the sort of detail range, the tiniest, subtlest sounds, there's a sort of noisier, airier quality to them rather than the slightly crunchy, I don't know. I've been doing this for a lot of years, and the trouble is with things like this, you basically can't hear what they do. If I set it up with maybe 100 of those gain plugs, maybe it would get to the point where you could clearly hear it on YouTube converted to lossy compression. The idea of anybody being able to hear what I just demonstrated and did on YouTube through lossy compression or the, people's iPhones and MP3s is kind of laughable. But there's some value to just trying to make the effort to do things properly where possible, to try to do stuff right. And I find that the sounds I get out of digital audio workstations, the sounds I get out of my computer, are more like what I like when all of my decisions are based around these ways of getting the most out of the digital audio sound. And I understand it's weird to talk about dithering or noise shaping to the 32-bit floating point bus because people are like, 32 bits down? Well, first of all, it's 24 bits down with the mantissa. Or actually, the 24 bits is the mantissa, maybe, and it's the exponent. I forget. Somebody will correct me, I'm sure. Point being, don't try to out-clever yourself. Digital can turn and bite you in all kinds of funny ways. And it's generally possible to make an effort just to do things a little bit better. And that's what I try to do around airwindows. That's why I'm doing all of these plugins. Pretty much all the recentest plugins are done with this dithering to the 32 floating point bus. And I just like the results that I get out of choices like that, even if they're subtle choices, so subtle that you'd have to stack 100 of these gain plugins to make it obvious. So there's PurestGain for you. It's a gain control. It's just a gain control. But hopefully some of the tricks that it's got going on are interesting, and it has always been a freebie because it always seemed completely insane to me to charge for doing gain over again. That gets into kind of snake oil stuff. And I realize I've demonstrated what the slow fade does and that there is more to this than just snake oil on the 32-bit floating point bus. But I would never want to charge for this. It's the sort of thing that should be built into the machine. And the fact that it's not quite is, again, the same thing that I think turned around and bit the old early Pro Tools DAWs. Because when you're adding together like 60 tracks, especially in a fixed point format, which at one point Pro Tools was running in a fixed point format for the internal calculations. Now that can be 24-bit, for instance, but you're going to be gathering stuff together into little submixes, and there's going to be a lot of math and multiplying and adding and dividing and stuff like that. And you get to where you've got your unity gain going on in this big complicated mix. And then when you start moving the faders, everything is getting multiplied in a fixed point format about 5 or 6 times to get its way through the. And well, I just demonstrated multiplying 5 or 6 or 7 times on a floating point bus, and even then found that if I stacked it up enough, it felt a little crunchier than it was supposed to. Now imagine what that's like on just a 24-bit bus. We ignore this stuff at our peril. PurestGain is free. It is audio unit and VSD for PC and Mac. And if you listen to all of that, wow, I'm proud of you. And you probably shouldn't care about this stuff quite as much. Leave that to crazy nutballs like me who spend our days sitting around thinking about these things and trying to make them better. I should be able to give you plugins where you put the plugin in and you just use it as comes naturally and it sounds awesome. You shouldn't have to fuss too hard about like, oh, this and that and the bus and the 24 and the 32-bit and so on. It's not what should come into your mind while laying down tracks or arranging EDM and thinking of what kind of noise goes where and what frequency range it belongs and so on and so forth. Those are not times to be worrying about the bit depth, unless you're doing a bit crusher, in which case knock yourself out. I hope you enjoy PurestGain and don't fuss with it too much. It's just a gain control. Thank you.